The only philosophical problem that is truly serious, says Albert Camus, is suicide. To judge whether or not life is really worth the living is to answer philosophy's most fundamental question. Now, I suppose that if we could somehow make a calculation of all the people who had committed suicide, we would find that a very small number, if any, had ever sat down and made a cold, rational calculation of the joys and the pains in life, and then, because the answer was negative, had gone out and thrown it all up. Yet at the same time, when we stop to think of the number of people who do commit suicide for a few reasons, or poor reasons, or no reason, and then on the other hand, the people who will battle with what seems to us unbearable tragedy and cling on to the end and even perhaps say it was good, it was worth it, then we wonder if, after all, the clue to all this doesn't lie in one's philosophical answer to this question of whether or not life itself is worth living. Obviously, our view of suicide will vary greatly according to whether we put it in the religious context or the humanistic one. If we once assume that there is a God and that he has given man a purpose, a place in a universe that has a meaning, then the only attitude one can take logically is a negative one so far as suicide is concerned. But if we take the other point of view, if we assume that there isn't any overall purpose for the universe, then we have a different question. Albert Camus, in his book, The Myth of Sisyphus, puts the question in humanistic terms. I do not know, he says, whether or not this world has a meaning which transcends it. But this I am fully aware of, that if there is a higher meaning, it is not one which it is possible for me to know. And if the meaning is not a human meaning, then how can it be a meaning at all for me? In this case, the leap in question is no longer the leap toward God in faith. It is the literal leap over the precipice toward death. What one encounters, if one assumes that there is no higher meaning, is what existentialist writers have called the absurd. Absurdity is a discrepancy, a gap between man's aspirations and that which he is capable, even at best, of achieving. It is the fact that when man appeals to the universe for meaning, for form, for unity, there is no answer. In The Myth of Sisyphus, Camus has described how we encounter the absurd in our everyday lives. Most of the time, we go through without standing apart to ask questions. But suddenly, it may be in the midst of our seeming to be one with our environment that the stage set, as it were, collapses, and we are left there against a backdrop of nothingness. In our lives, we know that we rise, we take the streetcar, we work 4 hours in the office or the factory. We eat lunch, we work 4 hours in the office or the factory. We take the streetcar, we go home, we sleep. And Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, all in the same rhythm, until one day the why arises in that weariness that is tinged with amazement. We encounter the absurd when the why arises, but we meet it also in time. Mostly, we are carried along by time. We speak of later, tomorrow, when I get settled, when I get this done. But suddenly one day, a man sits at a table, and he looks at a mirror, and he says, I am 30. Thus he situates himself with regard to his youth. He asserts it. But he places himself also in relation to time. He admits that he stands at a certain point on a curve, that he acknowledges having to travel to its end. But what is at the end? Death. He was looking toward that tomorrow of death when with all of his self he should have been cringing from it. And that revolt of the flesh, that too is the absurd. The absurd comes not only from the inhuman universe. Sometimes men too can secrete the inhuman. If we should suddenly see men's actions separated from this backdrop of meaning, they too become only mechanical and silly. It's as though we were watching all of the time a man in a telephone booth but could not hear what he said. He gestures, he speaks excitedly. For him there is a connecting link. But for us, it is foolishness. It is an incomprehensible, dumb show. As Camus says, this discomfort in the face of man's own inhumanity, this incalculable tumble before the image of what we are, this nausea is also the absurd. To meet nausea as a philosophical term is a very strange thing, and something which I think could not have happened before the 20th century. But it is one of the most familiar concepts in existentialism. We all know nausea of this sort. It is a flat, stale taste in our mouths, when we realize that one part of us, at least, has no more reason for being here, is no more necessary than the brute things in the world around us. The most dramatic presentation of nausea can be found in Jean-Paul Sartre's novel, which is called simply Nausea. In it, the hero is sitting in a park, and he experiences what he calls a horrible ecstasy. It is the very opposite of the religious pantheistic ecstasy, where man feels himself happily at one with the universe, penetrated by God. Here the things of the world seem to pour in upon him, and he and they alike are in the way. They are superfluous, unnecessary, de trop.
Existence had suddenly unveiled itself. It was the very paste of things. This root was kneaded into existence. Or rather the root, the park gates, the bench, the sparse grass, all that had vanished. The diversity of things, their individuality, were only an appearance, a veneer. This veneer had melted, leaving soft, monstrous masses all in disorder, naked, in a frightful, obscene nakedness. Superfluous. De trop. It was the only relationship I could establish between these trees, these gates, these stones. In vain I tried to count the chestnut trees, to locate them by their relationship to the statue, to compare their height with the height of the plane trees. Each of them escaped the relationship in which I tried to enclose it, isolated itself and overflowed. De trop, the chestnut tree there opposite me, a little to the left. De trop, the statue, and I, soft, weak, obscene, digesting, juggling with dismal thoughts, I, too, was de trop. I dreamed vaguely of killing myself, to wipe out at least one of these superfluous lives. But even my death would have been superfluous. De trop my corpse, my blood on these stones, between these plants, at the back of this smiling garden. And the decomposed flesh would have been de trop. The earth which would receive my bones, at last cleaned, stripped, peeled, proper, and clean as teeth, it would have been de trop. I was de trop for eternity. And without formulating anything clearly, I understood that I had found the key to existence, the key to my nauseas, to my own life. In fact, all that I could grasp beyond that returns to this fundamental absurdity. every existing thing is born without reason, prolongs itself out of weakness, and dies by chance. Had I but dreamed of this enormous presence? It was there, in the garden, toppled down into the trees, all soft, sticky, soiling everything, all thick, a jelly. And I was inside, I with the garden. I knew it was the world, the naked world suddenly revealing itself, and I choked with rage at this gross, absurd being. You couldn't even wonder where all that sprang from, or how it was that a world came into existence rather than nothingness. It didn't make sense. The world was everywhere, in front, behind. Of course, there was no reason for this flowing lava to exist, but it was impossible for it not to exist. I shouted, "Filth! What rotten filth!" and shook myself to get rid of this sticky filth, but it held fast, and there was so much, tons and tons of existence, endless. I stifled at the depths of this immense weariness, and then, suddenly, the park emptied as through a great hole. The world disappeared as it had come, or else I woke up. In any case, I saw no more of it. Nothing was left but the yellow earth around me, out of which dead branches rose up.